This is where theory meets real life. So we've been talking about theology. We've been talking about, what's our topic anyway? Purpose. I think the Mexican food's getting to my brain. There's some jumping beans around, leaping around. But right from the start, we wanted to put faces with some of these things that we're talking about. How does God use women? How does God call women? How do we find our purpose? Well, these three women came to mind, and we're so glad that they've been willing to participate and share their story. You can read about them on your sheet, but Sebla is from Ethiopia, and we have just today met, so I'm delighted. And she's a doctoral student here. And I'm going to invite Sebla to talk about how she got to this place and how she has perceived God. Specifically, the questions we asked the participants to consider were these. How have you found God's purpose in your life and work? And additionally, how does the theology you were raised with affect your role, your ministry, practice, or work? Now, where they go with that is, up to them, but we'd love to hear your stories. Sebla.
Good afternoon. Hi. Well, I don't know if I'm going to answer these questions, but honestly, but I'm going to share you my story. If you can find purpose in it, that will be great. Yeah. When I think of purpose, for me, the first question which comes to my mind is, why do I exist? Why am I here? And the other question which comes to my mind is the wrong questions we ask sometimes. What do you do for a living? I feel like it should be the other way around. Why are you here? To do what? To accomplish what? So I don't know. I'm going to share you my personal story. I hope it will encourage you. When we were praying about this with Ingrid, she prayed and said, this is going to be from heart to purpose. So I said, that will be a good title. And I think that's what I'm going to share with you, from heart to purpose. We all have unique gifts. We are created uniquely to participate in the kingdom work. And it is exciting, but it's not always easy. When you think of your purpose and to accomplish that purpose to the fullest, I don't think the road is always green and happy. Sometimes we have difficulties, and we are told it's not going to be easy. But one thing that encourages me is He's with us. He has promised to be with us. And because of that, we can live our purpose. There is hope. I don't know, you may have sweet, good memories about these days, especially February 14. Many people have stories to share. I have stories to share too. But not all of them are really sweet, but somehow sometimes strong, and I've learned from them a lot. February 14, 2007 was the day my ex-husband packed everything that he can pack in the car and left in the morning. And there were many things that I can't share with 8 to 10 minutes, but it wasn't easy. That morning, I woke up. Usually, I try to be positive and optimistic somehow. I woke up with hope, thinking things might change, but it didn't. I noticed he was packing, so I had no energy to continue discussing more. I just went to the bedroom, opened my laptop, looked for the devotion for the day. I don't know, some of you may have encounter with this devotional, the word for today. I don't know if that day, if you go back and Google for February 14, 2007, that day the topic was the text from the scripture was Hebrew 13:5. I will never leave you or abandon you. I just felt like God was present. I felt like he was touching me. I felt unique presence and his control in my life. I'm looking at the car going out through the gate, through my window. I said, okay, God, just be with me. And to make it worse, it was a foreign land. I'm Ethiopian. I was married to a Kenyan man, and I was living in Kenya. So my closest friends and relatives were my in-laws, and we are still good friends. Christian, matured people, they stood with me and they prayed with me. I'm not going to get deeper into that, but I just want you to know it was not an easy experience. I had up and downs in life. That was, I think, the worst one. And for 2 months, I didn't talk to anyone. I just locked myself in. The only thing I will do will be crying. I had no strength even to sit and cry. Usually I'm on the floor, and sometimes, honestly, my eyes were not even able to open because they were heavy from crying too much. And thank you. One day, I was praying as usual. I don't know if you have been to Kenya. It's known for crime, Nairobi especially. I really begged God, can you send someone? Because I cannot kill myself. I feel I'm done. I feel things are really finished. But will you send someone so that I cannot put your name into shame? I will not be adding any statistics on the divorce list. I used to work for Compassion Ethiopia before that. I've served you and raised so many young people. And now what am I going to tell them? And God didn't send anyone. I was alive. I noticed I'm living. So I said, one day I woke up, I said, God, if I am not dying, then let me live. Let me live with my purpose and calling. And it is possible with you. To make it short, God made a way, and I met a good pastor and good church, got connected, and got a support group. They took me to a process for healing. It took some time, but then one of the things I needed to do was to look for that sweet spot in my career and ministry journey. For me, I don't know if you have read Amy Sherman's book, Kingdom Calling. She talks about this sweet spot where our purpose, calling, and gift, and everything meet together. And we become really efficient and satisfied. I went to connect with the Compassion Ethiopia office, Kenya office, and they opened their door. It was great. November 2008. November 2007. And I started working for them, but just right after I joined them, in December, there was election, and things were bad. The post-election violence destroyed most of the projects, especially the projects I took over in Kibera. One of them was destroyed, completely destroyed. The people nearby, Nubian community, they were looking for opportunity, Muslim community, to finish the church, and they finished the church. They burned the church, pastor's house, the project we had. I'm also going through this crisis in life, and on top of that, for me, I am from a poor country, but going to Kibera was really depressing because I was asking God, what am I going to do here? Things are really complicated. To make it worse, the post-election violence finished one of my projects especially. People were not able to sit together. And especially the leaders, the pastors, were struggling a lot. So I felt like God was saying, maybe this is an opportunity, that your crisis, this crisis, will be a stepping stone for growth, to learn and participate in a healing, reconciliation, and restoration movement, which needed to start from me. Especially experiencing forgiveness was not easy. But God is able. I was healed, restored, and stood in the middle of the church leaders for reconciliation and healing. About 34 churches came together, the leaders, at the end. And we were able to create a movement for healing, restoration, through the church to the community. I'm just telling you like 1 or 2 years story in 10 minutes. Yeah. At the end, that project was an A project when I left. And we even became creative and had initiatives which became later, after I came here, global initiatives. What am I trying to say is, if you feel maybe 1 or 2% here that you are done maybe with this life, but you are still breathing and alive, there is hope to get back to the track and, in fact, differently, with strength, and bring change. Maybe at the end, I want to remind you one verse from Proverbs 4:1, to pay attention and gain understanding. Why do we pay attention? It will help us to see God's design. And when we gain understanding, then we will find our sweet spots, get connected to our purpose with this life, and become fruitful. God bless you.
Thank you, Sevla. These are real stories, and that's why we want these women to be here and share with you. Some of you are going to connect with any one of these women up here. So thank you so much, Sevla, for sharing. And now we move to Jane, a different story. Why don't you tell us how you got here and how you've seen God's purpose in your life?
Yeah, thank you so much for allowing me to share a little bit of what God has been doing in my life and also the life of my family. To tell the story, I guess, of how I got here, it's impossible not to include the story of my parents. Just to briefly introduce myself, I am Korean American. I was born in Philadelphia, but I grew up in Beijing, China. My parents were missionaries. And so I grew up in China for most of my life. And my intention is to go back and serve at the underground seminary. To find the purpose in our life, I think it cannot be divorced from the experiences in the suffering and the trials that we have had to go through. My mom usually likes to say how life has felt like it was always swimming up the stream. And first sort of pushback that our family has received when my parents had decided to go to China was from our immediate family. They have all attacked my parents vigorously, saying, "How dare you want to take your children to China at this day when we just saw in the news about the Tiananmen massacre against a student protest." And that was the environment that we were surrounded by. We were part of Korean immigrants, and so the ambitions and aspiration was all upon children, our children, that we will be able to support them to go to the best schools. Hence, we are here in America where you have the best universities. But then the critique was really, how dare you deprive them of those opportunities? Take them to a place where there's obviously bad pollution and who knows what kind of school they will be going to. And surprisingly, my brother and I, we would run back home from kindergarten singing and chanting off the top of our lungs the communist anthem. We would say, 没有共产党就没有新中国, which means if there is no communism, then there shall be no China. So I'm sure these were the moments when my mother thought, I wonder if the family had something really to say about this. But that those are the moments where in prayer, God has reminded our family of his promise to us, that we shall seek after all these things that the Gentiles worry after, and yet he knows and he cares far much for our children and our welfare, more so than we can ever care for our own children. So seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. All these things shall be added unto you. And that has truly, I think, allowed us to stand firm as a family. But still, trials were getting greater and greater. My mother gave birth to a Down syndrome baby brother in her 40s, and was faced with other kinds of accusations. China, as you all know, has a one-child policy. So if you were to have a child, you wanted to guarantee that this child is going to be perfect and beautiful. And even up to the stage where she was being drawn to the surgery room, she was asked, "Are you sure you want to do this? Because it's still not too late." And it was hard for me at my teenage years to understand what God's purpose was in giving us this child. All gifts ought to be perfect if it came from God, but in my eyes, my brother was not perfect. He had heart defects. He had 3 surgeries. And more so than his physical imperfections was my worry as to how we were going to be perceived in China. This was a stigma. And it was hard for me to think that there was God's good purpose in giving this child to our family when our job was to show others how great it was to be Christians. And this was not a good thing to have with us. And so there was much confusion for me. At the age of 17, God took my father in a car accident in China. So he passed away. I, again, became more confused, and even to the point of bitterness. I did not know why 12 years of ministry has ultimately ended in him taking away my father when he had so many things to do, so many opportunities to further expand the kingdom. And he had founded a seminary. We had planted churches in Beijing. And this was, in my mind, the absolutely most, the last timing that God could have chosen to take him. And also, for me personally, I was getting ready to prepare for college. The year before that, the summer before that, my dad had promised me, after the many times he didn't get to spend time with us, he said, this is something special that I want to do just with you. I want to travel back to the States and we will visit some colleges. And it was literally 2 months before the end of that semester that he had taken away my father. Was my brother going to grow up without knowing a father? What is going to happen to my mother? She has always been the faithful, committed missionary wife, pastor's wife, submissive. Who is she going to rely on? What is going to happen again to the churches, all the students that have come from all over the country? So confusion, a lot of confusion, and anger filled my heart. And those were times when I couldn't hear the advice and the encouragement that people brought to me. It was just a lose-lose situation. You could tell me whatever that you think will help, and I wouldn't have an ear to really hear. And I was not ready, I think, to see what God's purpose was in this. And to be honest, I think the only thing that really helped me during this time was reading the book of Job. And it wasn't until I read, Job 38, and I'll just read a couple of verses. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footing set, or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. Who was I to rant against God, the Creator? Who was I to think that I knew what was right for our family and for the ministry that my father had started? And this was what really put me in my place, I think. It humbled me to a point where I couldn't help but to go through that painful process of letting go of what I thought ought to be the way our life painted out, and to surrender unto God and say, yes, Lord, you are sovereign. And although I might not know what's ahead, I trust that you know. And so that has really just opened up a whole new world to my family and I. My mother, on the day of the funeral, stood in front of about 700 Chinese brothers and sisters and said, all my life in ministry I've served my husband, but now I have committed myself to serve the church. You are now my husband, and I shall serve you faithfully and with devotion, just as I have for my husband. And my father was buried in China. My mom decided to buy herself another plot of land right next to him, and have devoted her life also to the mission. And I have witnessed how God has miraculously risen my mother. She has had to reorient her life and to think back to that day when she herself had to commit to God and to his mission. And I think that was just a transformative experience for her. She honestly has no seminary training, but she is now the chairperson of our missions organization. And I come from a very conservative theological tradition, so our supporting churches generally do not provide leadership opportunities for women in ministry. But so many times, both her and I have been able to have the honor to be the first woman to step onto the podium and to share of what God is doing in China. Not just the glorious things, but also the areas where we really, really have shortcomings, such as the sort of leadership development for the churches in China. And it really wasn't until we understood why we were going through the kinds of suffering, and to interpret that interpret God's purpose for us through that. And so in light of that, I think I have one sort of brief, I guess, comment that I wanted to share that was helpful for me. As I share my story with a lot of people, I think many are sort of brought into a position where they think, oh, goodness, Jane, I don't have the kind of experiences you've been through. I haven't lost somebody special in my life. I haven't had the kinds of, the moment of crisis or whatnot. But I think it's not so much the kinds of experiences that we go through that makes us who we are, but it's in different degree, right? I think we've all been through pain and suffering, but it's when we know how to interpret those moments and how we reflect upon them that makes us who we are today. How have I intentionally tried to think through these experiences? And in what ways do I think God is trying to use them to shape my future direction? So that's something I just wanted to share. Thank you so much for just giving me this platform to speak.
And thank you, Jane. Very compelling stories. I so appreciate the depth of your observations even about your own life. That is really, I want to have a conversation with each of these women. Don't we all? And finally, Amanda Holm Rosengren. And I have to say, Amanda and I started seminary at the same time in 2005, and she was my first friend. I had just sent my youngest child off to college, and then I scurried back to go to do orientation at seminary, and I relied a lot on Amanda because I hadn't been in school for a long time. So we happened to be in the same advisory group, same systematic theology class, and I was so grateful she was there. And now you've grown up, and you're now a pastor.
I'm a pastor.
So I'm going to let Amanda tell you her story.
Thanks, Carol. Yeah, Carol was a very special person to me, too, and encouraging me in those first days of seminary when I'm, freaking out because I don't know anybody, and I'm the only girl in this class, and blah, blah, blah. Well, not in systematic theology, because Carol was in there with me. But anyway, yes, my name's Amanda, and I serve at a local church, Church of the Redeemer, and have served full-time since 2009 and part-time for even a few years before that. So that's kind of my background. But I am the most surprised of anybody to be where I am and to be wearing this thing, which is not just for decoration, I guess. It's a symbol. As I was thinking, purpose. What is our purpose? As a pastor, I think one theological answer is we're made to worship. That's our purpose in a really big sense. And as I reflected on my own life and on kind of the people I know, I think an aspect of that is worshiping God through being who we're meant to be, not trying to be somebody else. So that's kind of a big theme for me. If you've heard me preach, I do not normally do this, but I actually have an alliterated list of things through which I found my purpose. It's really unlike me. It just kind of happened at a TSW meeting the other day. So, summarize before I start. I've found my own purpose through pain, as these ladies have, through people, and through proclamation, presence, and prayer, by which I mean the work of ministry. So that's my overall story. I grew up in Southern California. My dad was the music minister, and my mom was the church pianist and organist. So as you can imagine, music played a big role in my life. And I think when I was growing up, I thought that my purpose was to be famous someday. First, it was going to be in piano, because I was a good pianist, and that was like my thing. Then I had this crisis. I went to a conservatory for a couple of years and had this crisis where I realized, oh, this is just an idol. I'm so arrogant. Like, what was I doing? I'm just like this because I'm good at it. You know how college can be. So I ended up with an English major and then had my first theology class and was like, hey, this is great. I had a professor who encouraged me in that, and then I decided I was going to be famous as an evangelical woman theologian in the church. I was going to save the world, one woman at a time. So that's really what brought me to Trinity. As I tell my story, there's a big watershed event that happened for me in 2008. So there's kind of me before that and me after that. And it was in the middle of my seminary time. So me before that, coming into seminary, I really saw myself as a mind. I thought anything with feelings or like counseling or pastoring was really touchy-feely and like just was inferior to my superior intellect, You might have caught that from some people at Trinity, thinking that mind is everything. This is the anecdote I like to tell. When I had to take the Myers-Briggs, personality thing with the 4 letters, and I found out I was an F and not a T, I was devastated. Like, I took the test a couple times, trying not to cheat, but like, really, I'm a feeler? Ugh. And really, you can kind of summarize God's work in my life over those 4 years as reconciling myself to who I've been made to be. Because I didn't want to be that. I wanted to be someone else. So at that time, I was really shut down emotionally, didn't know myself, again, thought of myself as a mind. But in the middle of all that, I was in a class at seminary with Dr. Miriam Charter, who was a Some of you might remember her. And this I don't think had anything to do with the class, but somehow in the middle of the class, I heard clearly in my head the sentence, "You're going to be a pastor." And I think I had like whiplash inside, because that was not something I'd ever thought of for myself, wasn't something I'd ever seen modeled for myself, wasn't sure I even thought women could do that. But it was such a clear thing in my head, and my response was, "God, if that's you, you're going to have to make me want it." He did. Yeah, that's not something I wanted at all, even though I'd begun to get involved with the church and serve with the music. That's a whole other kind of thing. But yeah, I just thought, that's not me. That's inferior. I don't want to be that. I want to be this. And then was my really crisis couple of years where it started out with people around me going through really painful things and kind of learning, I'm actually pretty good at being with people when they're in pain. Like, I actually kind of like that and being supportive. Because I hadn't really known that before. I told the women the other day that my motto in high school was, my informal motto, was that people are stupid. So I didn't consider myself a people person up until this time when I started realizing, hey, I really care about these people. I'm a people person now, even though people do stupid things, but so do I. But yeah, so I had friends who were in deep, deep pain, and something in me came alive just in being next to them in their pain. And then I had my own deep experience of crisis that encompassed my whole world, my roommates and my church and my school. And it was really like something in me had been torn, and I couldn't just put it back together again the way I used to. It was through that experience I actually went to one of those touchy-feely counselor types and discovered, oh my gosh, look at all this stuff that I've been carrying around with me, this people-pleasing and this lack of boundaries and all this stuff that had led to me being this kind of shriveled up person before. And I was humbled a lot during that time, and kind of realizing how I'd contributed to the pain that I was experiencing, even as it wasn't all my fault. Some of you have probably had that experience too. But so I had this couple of years that I think the analogy I like to use was really like in the Chronicles of Narnia, when Eustace is the dragon and the skin is being ripped off of him. I feel like I grew 10 years in like a year. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But I came out on the other side, kind of realizing more who I was. I also had been diagnosed with depression, struggled with that off and on, so that's a whole nother thing. But in the midst of all this, I was getting involved more at church, and it was my last semester at seminary where I switched my little focus from academic research to pastoral care, and that was a big deal for me. Big deal. So in the midst of all this, I really wanted to stay at my church. I'm graduating. I have student loans. I couldn't pay those on my $100 a week music minister salary thing. But our church is fairly small, not equipped for a big staff. And so I really didn't know what to do. I felt called to this place. I wanted to serve in this place. I loved this place and this people. I loved working with our senior pastor, Jay, who was another big reason. That was one of the people parts. And Jay and a few other people got together and made a position for me at the church full time. And that was a miracle. Like, I really think that was. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for those people who fought for me. A position created for me. And since then, as I've been learning the work of ministry, and sometimes the hard way, but learning what it is to be with people, and that there's something in me that was made to be God through this way to people, to represent God, to represent Jesus in that way to people, to realize that I'm gifted in encouragement, and that kind of that filters out through all different parts of my ministry, and that's a great thing, to realize that just being with people is sometimes more powerful than doing things for them. So as I've said, my life's been a big journey, and I'm really thankful for being on the other side of all of that, and not that it won't happen again. But I want to encourage you, don't be afraid to deal with your stuff. Don't be afraid to find out who you are and to live out of that. And don't let someone else tell you what that is.
Wow.
Thanks.
Wise final word, Amanda. Thank you. You know, we don't have a lot of time for follow-up, but there is one theme that I actually heard referenced in each one of these women. And I wrote it down as, in finding God's purpose in our lives, we need to leave a large space for humility. I heard that from each one of you. That whether it was in the brokenness of relationship and finding yourself in a place you hadn't imagined, or being in a different culture, loss, and questioning God, or saying, I could never do that. I love that, Amanda. God, if that's you, you're going to have to make me want it. That's a prayer of humility. We have a couple of minutes. Any of you want to expand on that at all?
There's so much that could be said in that, and humility is one of those things that's hard to talk about and still value yourself. I think, especially as women, we often struggle with that and having a adequate sense of worth, but not taking it too far. At least that's something I've struggled with over the course of my life. And I think at least for me, and I think hopefully anybody in ministry has to go through this. You have to come to that. You have to recognize who you are, and that's you're not God, and you're not supposed to be. And sometimes it takes pain to find that out, but I definitely had to come to that spot.
Yeah. Jane, any thoughts?
I think when I hear that, I think humility comes with partially recognizing that I was wrong, that I had incorrect assumptions that I had been living with, and I need to break that down and start looking for correct ones to embrace. And in my particular story, it was in assuming, again, I call it the retribution theory. For example, I think if I do all this, God will give me something. So that was why I was upset with him. How can you do this? But in reality, when it boils down to what I was actually assuming, it was this idea that God was a contractual God. And so I needed to rethink that, and the kinds of experiences has allowed me to break that down and to reassess my understanding of who he is, and not just that we ought to be even doing things constantly, church planting, evangelism, and setting up schools, but that our understanding of what it means to be doing missions work was partially also being Christians, just being there, living as Christ followers, and showing what real pain and grief could look like. Yeah.
And Sebla, you described a scenario that was very humbling. How did God lift you out of that? You mentioned that others came around you.
Okay. One thing I feel humility does to us is brings us to spirituality. When I experienced shame, also anger, there were choices, especially the two choices I won't forget. Either bitterness or betterness, to become better. So if you want to choose to become better, then the only way out is through the cross. It brings you to the cross. And one thing I've learned from the humility and then spirituality is to depend on God. And honestly, if we agree now to go through all this process, it will bring us to betterness, and that humility can change to power for God's glory. Yeah.
Always for God's glory, yes. Well, thank you, ladies, for joining us and for sharing your story. This has made such a rich contribution to today's conference. Thank you.